Hey everybody, welcome to YouTube Live. It may take a minute for people to get used to this, so consider this just a practice session for this week. We've already got 2 students coming in here. Welcome Amy, welcome JMG, welcome CB. I don't know if you're using your initials because you'd like to remain partially anonymous, that's totally fine. So even if I kind of can guess who that is, I will just refer to people in terms of the letters that I see on the screen. Whew. Now that you are viewing me live, you get to learn the secrets of college math. And one of the secrets, if you watch my College Math is Back video from week 1, is that this is a unheated back room behind my house, and it's actually freezing in here. Okay, it's not actually freezing, but it's pretty darn close. It's about 38 degrees in here. And so usually when I'm making a video, this is what I look like. And then when I'm ready to make a video, then I do my modeling thing like, and then I take all my stuff off to make it look like it's heated, but it's not heated. It's freezing in here. Okay, so I'm just gonna give it a few more minutes while people get kind of situated here. This is a little bit complicated, but I'm hoping that we'll get used to it. There's really 3 different screens involved here. There's the screen on which you're viewing my stream, and there's the Canvas page where you're viewing the results from the polls. And so the same place that you found the URL so that you can view this live stream is the same place, if you scroll down a little bit, that you're going to see the results from the polls coming in. And then the third screen involved is the thing marked number 2 on that page, which is the live polls questions link. So you have to have the questions link open so that you can type in your response. Welcome Kristen, Carlos, Jenna, Dreama, Lily, MK, Mars, Joe, Lily. Oh, I see. You put your last name in too. Good. Welcome everybody. It's a little bit hard to read it because the word cloud is moving, but hopefully everybody kind of figures out what works for them in terms of the setup. Again, there's 3 different screens involved, and you might want to open 3 different browser windows. Like I like to have my screen of me live streaming as just a little window up in the corner. So I'm just going to make that kind of small and put me up in the corner so I can see me. And then I've got the other screen with the live poll results. That's the Canvas page. And so I can see the word cloud populating on another spot in my window. And then I've got a third window, which is just the live poll questions link, so that if I wanted to type in a response or I wanted to add my 2 cents into the poll, then I've got that third location where I can respond to the polls. Okay, so it seems like we've got 16 responses, 16 results. If you're viewing the Canvas page, you can see the word cloud. And before I move on to the question list, I want to give a couple of rules about word clouds because they're a little bit finicky. And so before we go into our next word cloud, which is going to be about sharing our concepts for the week, I'm going to write up, Frank, how did you get your name big on there, Frank? I don't know. I'm going to write the instructions for word clouds up on the board here. Okay. So if you didn't notice, the mode that we're using right now is word cloud, and you're going to see the cloud getting formed. Some of those names are getting bigger than others. I see Frank and Marisa both have their names larger than the others, and usually words get larger when there's been more than one response. And so I'm guessing maybe those people put their name in more than once, and so that's how the name got bigger. That's okay for now. This is just a practice for the word cloud mode. Okay, one thing about word cloud mode is that if you have more than one word, then more than one word needs to be connected with an underscore so that the words don't get disconnected. For example, Lily, I see the name Lily on there, and then messenger. And those, if you wanted that to be one phrase altogether, you would have had to connect those with an underscore. And so I'm going to write that on the board so people know what I mean. This will become more important when we move on to our next question. Okay, so I've got the instructions, like I was saying, up on the board here. And this is true just for the word cloud mode. As we go through today, we're going to see several different modes emerge. And this is just for the word cloud mode, that because it's trying to make a cloud out of all the responses, it kind of expects single word responses. Well, sometimes you're going to have more than one word for your response. And in that case, if you want to make sure that those two words don't get separated, you have to connect them with an underscore. The underscore will not appear. It'll appear as a space, but then these two words will get stuck together. And that's what we're going to be looking for, like in the next question about what the concepts are. If you wanted to answer that one of the concepts for this week was state space, then you would write it like this. State underscore space. If you don't write it like that, if you don't put the underscore, then the word state and space will get disconnected, and then they'll float around individually, and then it'll lose its context. So make sure that you use the underscore. The other thing about word cloud is that it has an option to let you change your answer, and I do have it set on change your answer, so you should be able to. But apparently, the change your answer setting only works temporarily. And so you can try it out by putting in a word right now. Like if I write in a response, you'll see the response that I just entered appear directly under the submit button. And then there'll be this little trash can next to it. The little trash can means that you can take that back if you want. You can delete it. But around the trash can, there's this little circle. And the little circle is like a ticking time thing, and it's slowly disappearing. So after about 15 seconds, the trash can disappears, and then you can't change your answer. I tried to set it so that you could change your answer as well as possible, but unfortunately, it's still for some reason times that. And so there's a time limit on your ability to change your answer. Let's say I typed in my name, but I did a typo, so I didn't spell name right. I'll see the response that I put in directly underneath the response submit button. And then there'll be this little trash can here. And then there'll be a circle around the trash can. And that circle slowly, every second, goes down more and more and more. And eventually that circle goes away. And when the circle around the trash can goes away, then the whole trash can goes away. And then you can't take it back. That's unfortunate. I wish they would let you change it out forever, but they just give you a time limit. So watch out for that. So those are the two things that I want you to watch out for when we do word clouds, that you need to connect multiple words with an underscore, and that you only have a time-limited opportunity to change your answer. Okay, cool. So I've got 15 viewers still, so 16 viewers, that's great. I'm doing good, and we've got 24 results in the word cloud there. Hopefully everybody who wants to be here is now here, and welcome. And I hope this proves itself to be a useful resource for you, as all of this data will be saved and this live stream will be turned into a video that you can rewatch after this occurs. With that said, I'm going to move on to our first curricular question. So stay on your same live poll question link. And where it used to say, who's here, enter your name, now it should say, what are your ideas for key concepts this week? And that was one of my goals for Tuesday, was to allow the class to share out some key concepts before we submit it as an assessment to the discussion board. And so if you scroll down on the Canvas page, then you'll see Somebody just put in feedback loops, and that's great. Yeah, that is a huge concept. Somebody put in differential equations. Another person has just put in feedback. And so we'll give that a couple minutes. Go ahead and populate that with up to 3 different concepts. You can enter the concepts one at a time, up to 3. And then we'll see this beautiful word cloud emerge with your ideas. I see somebody using the live chat, and if you are logged into YouTube, there's also a live chat function through YouTube that's only accessible to people who have a YouTube account. So if you want to use that, either log into your YouTube or Gmail account or create one to do that in the future. And someone's sharing with me that they're having a hard time reading the whiteboard on 720 quality. Thanks for telling me that. I'm going to try to write as largely and as clearly as I can. But I did notice that the quality is not maybe the best for readability here. I think I've been trying to work on some lighting issues. If you want to see some more of the secrets of college math, besides the secret I shared early on, the fact that it's only 38 degrees in here, and that's why I've got this coat on. The other secret is it's quite a challenge for me to get good lighting in here. And so you can see my secrets. Here I have a makeshift studio lighting thing where I took a piece of cardboard and I taped a bunch of tinfoil on it. And I have a light pointed at that. You see, the reason is if I point the light straight at the screen, then you get this glaring light bubble thing on the screen. And that sucks. Wait, maybe that's better. Okay, so we could try that, but then unfortunately when I come in, it's all spooky because the light's shining right at me. I have tried so many different things to get the lighting in this place to work. You can see I got another makeshift lighting setup over there. My kid helped me make that. Thanks, Mo. So I don't know what's best. I thought I had made it as best as I could have. For this one, it's a little bit hard for me to work because there's like literally a light shining in my eye. And it also casts this huge shadow on the board. So I'm not sure if that worked better for you, but the person who's in the live chat, if you want to say that it's much better with this, what I could do is, I guess I could point it away while I write. And then when I get out of the way, then I could point it at the screen so you could read it better. I'll try to work with the group. The most important thing here is the concept of feedback. I need your feedback to know what's working and what's not working for you, and then I'll do my best to make you have the best experience possible. So keep putting in the feedback, and we'll try to work together. Okay, hopefully that was enough time for people to participate in the key concepts. Thanks for telling me that it's a little more readable now. Hopefully it'll stay that way. And I can see on the word, oh, great. Cool. I hope that is still readable. I did point it back at the shiny silver things. Maybe lights above the board would help. That's a really good suggestion. Thanks. I wonder if I could, well, I think Home Depot is an essential service. So maybe I can send somebody out for some different lighting at Home Depot. Getting back to the class material though, so I don't lose focus too much, I'm looking at the word cloud forming, and I have a lot of really great examples coming in on this word cloud. Oh, you're just there yesterday, cool. The biggest words that are emerging on this word cloud to me are feedback, feedback loops, state spaces, and functions. And so now I'd like to dive into one of those concepts in a little more detail, and maybe I'll pick feedback. Thanks for telling me about the Home Depot options there on the live chat. I'm going to go into the polling software now, and the next question you see is as explain concept in your own words. Because one of the biggest words on the word cloud is feedback, I'm going to change the caps concept to feedback in that next question. And then I'm going to open up that question. So everybody prepare for the question, the live poll question, to change in a second here. And it's going to change to our next thing, which is explain feedback in your own words. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question now. And this next question about explaining it in your own words is going to be a different format. It's no longer cloud format because your explanation might be like a sentence or more. It's going to be what's called the open-ended format. And in the open-ended format, you don't need to connect more than one word with an underscore. So again, we're changing formats to open-ended now, and you can feel free to just type things in naturally using spaces. You don't need to use an underscore. So you see that I just took it off of the word cloud and I put it on to explain feedback in your own words. And yeah, you can see that before when I had my plan, it just said explain concept in your own words because I didn't know what concept stood out to you. But now that I see the concept that stood out to you, I took that and I used it as feedback to change it, to change the next question to be more pertinent to what we're going to dive into. So that's just a little example of feedback that I just did. And how would you explain feedback? As the responses come into that, you'll see them scrolling again on the Canvas page, and you're going to see that somebody just put a big, nice paragraph of how they would explain it. And they've got some examples in there. A variable in a given system has feedback when the amount of the variable has an impact on its own value. We say that a variable has positive feedback if the value of that variable greater than 0 causes an increase, such as erosion in a watershed. Great example. And we say that a variable has negative feedback if a value greater than 0 decreases the amount of that variable, perhaps like pathogens in a body. So that first, thank you to whoever put that in. That first answer there to the current live question is a wonderful example of exactly what I would be looking for as one of the 3 paragraphs for your concept discussion post. These are all nice examples. I like the shadow, which makes it look like a B-movie horror flick. Yeah, that's ooh. Feedback. Tales from the graph. I don't know if anybody caught that reference from my snail kale tail, but Tales from the Graph. Did that remind anybody of a classic show? Maybe I shouldn't say. Anyway, the idea here is that you're seeing good examples of what's expected for the concept discussion post. And you can refer back to these later in the day as you prepare your response. Yeah, Tales from the Crypt, exactly. I'm the graph keeper, Melissa Navala. I'll show you so many graphs this quarter. It's going to be scary graphs, funny graphs, crazy graphs, chaotic graphs. It's going to be so great. I can't wait. Hopefully people are having fun with this. I'm having fun, and I'm seeing you respond in a variety of ways. So it seems like good engagement here. If you don't have, if you do have a YouTube account, there is a live chat on the side available if you've logged in through that YouTube account. And we got some funny comments and stuff and some sharing going on in that live chat. And so I'll just invite people to participate in that if they want to. Not everybody can see that. But hopefully everybody is seeing the responses as they come in on the Canvas page of the polling results. And we have all sorts of different explanations of feedback in people's own words. If you'd like to include some examples along with that, that would be great. This is the kind of thing that we're looking for in your concept discussion post. Remember that your concept discussion post has 3 paragraphs. So you have to do this for 3 different concepts. And each one of those paragraphs has 3 components. The first is just a statement of the concept. The second is the explanation in your own words, which we're seeing great examples of here on the live polls. And the third thing is include at least 1 example. And so that very first, that paragraph long submission, which you can scroll down to and see on the bottom of the results of this question, I would say that is an excellent example of exactly what I'm looking for. Great, great. So yeah, this is really finding itself to be a fun, active resource here. It describes a connected relationship between variables. Like, wasn't that fun when we described Java and Rancor's relationship? And it could be positive or negative at some times. Missed opportunity there. I had a typo in that video where I said when Java's unhappy, Rancor, if he's happy, gets less happy. He actually gets more happy, because if Job is unhappy, maybe it means that he's unhappy about someone and he's going to throw him into the Rancor pit, and maybe Rancor's going to get a bite to eat. Who knows? So that's kind of the example of how relationships can feed back onto themselves and affect themselves. I'll wait another minute on this, but you can see that the next question after that says, what are your questions about the concept? And so I was wondering if anybody had any questions or any part of that concept was still confusing. And so I'm just going to prepare that next live poll question for us to participate in, where I'm going to edit it and I'm going to change the word concept to feedback again. Feedback. Okay, and I got 13 explanations. Thank you, everybody, for contributing and making a great resource for all of our math students here in ecological dynamics. And now I'm going to move on to that next question, which says, what kind of open questions do we have about feedback? So now you should be able to see that. Again, this is the open-ended response mode, so you don't need to use the underscore. The underscore is just for the word cloud mode. And go ahead and ask any questions in there, and I will be answering them and using the board if I need to. While I wait for your questions to come in, I'm going to erase the board in case I need to use it for the answers. Because it's so dang cold in here, it's actually really hard to erase these whiteboards. I got to use a wet paper towel, and then I got to wait for it to dry, or dry it with a dry paper towel. That's why you don't see me erasing a lot of stuff in the videos. Hopefully, as the quarter goes on, this place will warm up a little bit, and it won't be such an issue. Whew. Okay, so I got some questions coming in that I'll start responding to. It says, I struggle to conceptualize feedback, particularly coming up with my own examples of positive or negative feedback loops. When I read examples in the book, they make complete sense, but as soon as I have to come up with my own, I draw a blank. Thanks for sharing that, because actually creating your own math, if you've had me before, you know how focused I am on that. Creating your own math is one of the hardest but most valuable parts of learning math. Because why else would we care unless we were going to apply it to something that matters to us? So knowing that and hearing that from students in the class, I would say, can we help out a little bit? Is there anybody out there who could respond to that with an example that they created of their own feedback loop? Even though it says, what are your questions about feedback? Because we see that as a really nicely stated, well-posed question, I would also offer this as a place for people to respond. So if there's anybody out there who wants to think of an example of a positive or negative feedback, and maybe you can state whether it's meant to be positive or negative, go ahead and put that into the open poll right now of what are your questions. Then the next question says, do we use positive and negative feedback only to reference one variable at a time, or can we use a variable and say it has positive or negative feedback in relation to another? That's a fantastic question, because that question there speaks to the dimensions of the state space. Remember, in the state space video, we talked about how many output variables are involved, how many different things in your system are changing in time. And so you can have feedback that references itself, or you can have feedback that influences another variable. If you only have a one variable system, then the only possible opportunity for feedback would be for that variable to feedback onto itself. Let me draw a little picture similar to what you see in the book section. Let's say that we have a one-dimensional state space in 1D. X is the only state. Then the only opportunity for feedback in that case would be for X to influence itself. Sometimes we denote that with a little circular loop drawing like this, where X is the state. And then what is X responding to? It's responding to feedback from itself. So we kind of draw a loop around so that it points back into itself. Okay, so that's an example from one dimensions, and whether that feedback is positive or negative will depend on the constant of proportionality. The corresponding state equation here would be x prime is equal to ax, and this is going to be a positive feedback if a is a positive number, and a negative feedback if a is a negative number. Moving on to two-dimensional space, because the rest of the question said, can we use a variable and say it has feedback in relation to another? Just a second. I'm going to pause just for a second because somebody's telling me that they can only add in one question. I feel like I must have set it on just one, and some people might have more than one question. That's a really helpful comment, and so I'm going to change it right now so that it says as many times as you like. So I just edited the question just now so that you can do more than one response. Now you can put in as many responses as you like, thanks to the student who gave me that feedback, and hopefully you can add in more questions now. Thanks a lot. Okay, so to finish responding to this one here, in two dimensions, then that opens the door to opportunity for states to have a feedback influence on each other. So let's say that we have X and Y are states. In the case of two dimensions, make sure you can see this. Okay, we have X and we have Y. And maybe X has influence on itself, which I would denote like this. But then X could also have influence on Y. And so I could point it over here. Likewise, maybe Y is already influencing itself, but then Y also has the opportunity, the ability to influence X. And the corresponding state equations to this would look something like this. X prime has influence from X and influence from Y. Y prime has influence from X and influence from Y. Okay, now moving back to one dimension here, when I wrote out this state equation, I used a constant of proportionality A to speak to how the influence is occurring. Here we have a linear feedback of X onto itself with constant of proportionality A. So I'm going to put the A on the X back to itself loop. That A there is the constant of proportionality there. Okay, to see if you understand the higher dimensional concepts here, why don't you try to think about where I would put the constants of proportionality? Like, which arrow would I put the A on? And which arrow would I label with the B? Which arrow would have the C? And which would have the D? I'm going to leave that up there as an open question for a minute and then answer it on the board in a second. And those constants of proportionality and the places that they go on this arrow diagram might help you to understand how we mathematically express the influence that states have on their own rate of change and on the rate of change of other states. Some people are saying that the video is a little choppy. That's unfortunate, but remember that when I end this stream, this will be turned into a video that's accessible to everybody after the fact, and it might make it easier on your Wi-Fi to stream this later. Hopefully later, if you give it time to buffer, hopefully it will replay better than it's playing right now. That's one of the advantages to this system. Okay, so as you think through that example there and try to fill in the labels A, B, C, and D, I'm going to read some more of the polls here. Great, somebody gave an excellent example of a positive feedback loop where they're saying the number of tree branches is positively influenced by the branching parameters. In a linear way where the constant of proportionality is B. So like, let's say that we have a tree and we want to describe how many branches are on that tree. The number of branches is really influenced, like the number of future branches is influenced by how many branches there are now. And if we're just going to talk about the number of branches as the only variable, that would be this case right here. Right? So for example, if X is the number of branches, every time I have a branch, then my rate of change is going to be 2 branches. And then every time I have those 2 branches, those are going to branch off each into 2 more. So then I'll have 4 branches. And so then this would be a positive parameter. This constant would be positive because the number of branches leads to a rate of change proportional to that number. This is a really overarching concept in ecology, because you may notice that if I take this state equation and I divide both sides by X, something really nice happens. Put it over here so you can see. If I take this and I divide by X, then I'm going to get this equation, which says that X prime divided by X is equal to A. So in the case of this linear type of feedback, what we're really talking about is a constant, the constant of proportionality, a constant per capita rate of change. Because you see here, when we have this ratio, X prime divided by X, this is a per capita rate. You'll see that in the book too. The per capita rate is constant. When you have that linear type of feedback, the per capita rate of change, and some of you may think that sounds familiar, learning about exponential functions, because exponential functions are functions that grow at a constant percent. Like let's say that we have a 10% growth rate. If we have a 10% growth rate, then it always grows by 10% of whatever there is at the time. And so that says that the rate of change is equal to 10% of how many we have at that time. And that constant 10% per capita rate is exactly what's getting described over here by having divided both sides by the X. Okay, so before I go on to more questions, for those who want to follow up on this 2D model here, I'm now going to attempt to put labels for the A, B, C, and D, where they should properly go on this feedback loop thingy. So let's see. This arrow right here is X's influence on itself. And in the state equations, that's spoken to by the constant of proportionality A. So I would put the A on that arrow right there. Trying to finish off the state equation for X prime, the influence of Y on the rate of change of X is B. So here this B is actually a thing that's multiplying the Y, which means Y is kind of like the input, and the effect of Y on X is B. And so I would put the B right here because this arrow is saying, how is the state of Y making an effect on X? And so I've got a B right there. And so likewise over here, the constant proportionality C is saying that how is X affecting the rate of change of Y? And that's what I'm trying to describe with this arrow, is that X is affecting Y. So the C would go here, and then finally the D would go over there. Hopefully that clears that up. And I'm looking through the comments here. So I've got a really interesting question here that I'd like to repeat for the group. It says, how can you still describe a system as having a net positive or negative feedback if the variable has a hard maximum or minimum? Interesting question. I came across this when trying to come up with examples similar to the overcrowding scenario that was just posted, or carrying capacity. Yes. So, and that's a follow-up on somebody mentioning about plant growth, that plants can grow, the growth rate increasing with increased precipitation, but many species can be overwatered. So at some points, there can be too much of a good thing, and then the growth rate will stall out or even become negative as that quantity increases. Then we've got another question coming that says, in our efforts to flatten the curve and social distance, we are directly trying to limit the feedback in this pandemic. Interesting time to learn this concept. Yeah, so I'll just respond to that one quickly from the get-go. You'll see that for week 2, there is a section of 1.4 on epidemiology that I'm not explicitly covering, but I'm saying that people can cover in their own interest. I do want to respect the fact that although this is a really interesting moment in our lives here and a chance to study epidemiology as a model, at the same time, some people are feeling overwhelmed. Some people have just heard nothing except coronavirus all over the news and everywhere. And some people might be looking for a chance to step back and away from that. So I want this learning experience this spring to be delightful for everyone. And so that's just the reason that I made it optional to study that, is that if you feel like this is a thing that you want to dive into, it is a really special moment to do that. And if you are sick of hearing about that and you just want to step away from that, we have space for that too. It's not expected that you have to go into that. But look into the epidemiology models, and speaking to this comment here, flattening the curve through social distancing is exactly parameter manipulation, right? So like some of these parameters, like maybe X is susceptible individuals and Y is infected individuals. And the number of susceptible individuals may have an effect on the number of infected individuals. In that case, the constant of proportionality C is the infection rate. And by doing and implementing social distancing, we are lowering this rate C. And as we go on to explore next week in the second half of chapter 1, trajectories and vector fields, you'll see that the effect of lowering a parameter, the spread parameter, in this case, it does help to flatten the curve so that there's less infected individuals at any single point in time. Although the same amount of individuals may get infected eventually, the level or the height of the curve at any single point in time will be lowered. And so our hospitals will have more capacity to deal with that. Great. And so I want to go back to the question now that says, how do you describe a system as having a net positive or negative feedback? Similar to the overwatering or carrying capacity scenario. I'm going to take a minute to erase the board so I can dive deeper into the concept of carrying capacity. Great. I'm glad to hear that some students are interested in looking into epidemiology. And if you want to get some interest started on the discussions there, feel free to talk to other students about that. In the epidemiology section, there's a lot of science there. So for our students who have a heavier science background, which I know some of you mentioned that you do, maybe you can really appreciate that from a biological perspective, the whole concept of gene transcription and stuff like that. I haven't taken much biology myself, so I'm kind of at the layperson level in biology is where I would describe myself. I'm just going to give the board a second to dry off, because if I don't, it will mess up the markers. Okay, so that feels pretty dry. I'm going to go into the question here that said about carrying capacity and how that has a hard maximum. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this from the perspective of population growth. And you'll see that the first example of population growth is the classic linear example, that the growth rate of the population X is proportional to how many members there are at the time. And assuming that this population is growing rather than shrinking, the parameter A would be a positive number. And we just went through how dividing both sides by X corresponds to illustrating the fact that it has a constant per capita growth rate. But like the comments on the left poll say, sometimes you have too much, and then there's this overcrowding perspective that comes in. So how we're going to model that overcrowding is that we're going to add another term here. It's no longer going to be linear feedback. Remember, linear means that we just have x to the first power. Rather than keeping this as a linear feedback, we're going to add in another term that looks like this. It's 1 minus x over n, where n here is what we're going to call the carrying capacity. So I'll label that n. N is going to be the carrying capacity. And let me go through a little explanation of where this term comes from and how that allows the system to approach what people are calling a hard maximum. So what this says here is that when x is small, it's going to grow linearly, like we saw before, because there's plenty of room, resources, and space to allow the per capita growth rate to remain constant. But as we start to approach the limit where that population is getting near its maximum, this whole term is going to go down. It's going to get less, which is to say that the rate of change is going to slow as x approaches the carrying capacity n. Okay, let's go in here and explain the terms here. X divided by n is the proportion of the carrying capacity that is currently filled. Okay, so this kind of goes back to my modeling assumptions. If I'm going to say that I have a hard maximum or some kind of limiting carrying capacity, my environment can only afford to sustain n of these, whatever they are, red squirrels. I don't know why I'm thinking about that right now. Maybe I've seen some in the ceiling around here, but let's say that we have a population of red squirrels, okay? And my environment can only hold n of them, okay? Well, how full is it right now? Like, for example, if there were n red squirrels right now, this fraction would be n over n, and so it would be 100% full, right? If I had, let's say n was 100 and I had 50 squirrels right now, then that fraction would be half. And so it would be 50% or half full. So this proportion of x divided by n describes how full my my situation is, where I have that capacity, right? So why do I have a 1 minus n here? Well, just like x over n represents that percent full, but as a fraction, as a proportion, this 1 minus is saying how much is left open, right? So if this is, 50, let's say that this turns out to be 0.25, so it's 25% full. If it's 25% full, then how much room do I have left to grow? It would be 100%, or 1 minus how full it is right now. And so 1 over x minus n is how much space is left, kind of. Okay, so the reason that it's getting multiplied by 1 minus n is because that's how much room there is left to grow. And so how we're going to model a system that kind of has that hard cap is that we're going to say the rate of change isn't always going to be proportional just to how many members there are, but that amount of proportionality is going to start to get capped off because it's getting multiplied by how much stuff we have left. It's actually a little bit easier to see this if you graph it, and we're going to get into graphing pretty soon here, but I might as well give you a little bit of a look ahead. Now for more tells of the graph. I was going to introduce this officially probably next week in a video, but let's say, remember that this is the function f of x here. Let's say that we want to graph this function f of x. Okay, take a look at how this behaves as the state variable x changes. So we could make a graph of f of x versus x. This is a new graph. I haven't introduced this yet, but I think it will help explain how this rate of change is going to die off as we get closer and closer to the carrying capacity. So it turns out that this is a polynomial. If you recall from pre-calculus, this is a second order or a quadratic polynomial. And you might be able to see that a little better if you factor it through. The first term is going to be ax, and the second term is going to be ax squared divided by n. So we have a parabola, and it's going to be a down-facing parabola because the squared term is negative, and it's going to have roots at 0, and it's going to have another root at n. So we're going to have a look like this. See? We're describing the rate of change here on the y-axis as a function of the state of the variable on the x-axis. And so remember, this is the rate of change. And what we're saying is that when the population is small, we have kind of this linear growth. Think about if you zoomed in really close to here, you would see like a line, kind of a line with slope A, right? But as our population grows more and more, at some point we're going to hit a maximum rate of change. And that's going to be the perfect medium where we have enough creatures that they're going to be repopulating quickly, and we still have enough space left over that we're not going to be too strained for resources. So that's what happens at the vertex or the maximum of the parabola. And then as we get further on towards the carrying capacity, you're going to see that right here, this is kind of the punchline, the answer to that person's question. This is where the rate of change is 0 at the carrying capacity. Okay, so you're going to see that I've got a big arrow pointing right there. The rate of change eventually becomes 0 again. That's what that term does for us, is it allows us to say, you know what, if you have too many of those squirrels, there's not enough food, there's not enough little hidey spaces for them anymore, so they're going to stop growing. And if you ever have more than that amount of squirrels, what's going to happen here is you're going to dip into a negative territory, so that when you have more creatures than your carrying capacity can hold, this is where your rate of change is going to be negative, which means there's going to be more births than deaths. in that part of the situation. We'll see that more. We're going to really work with these graphs a lot as we move on in the program, but hopefully that helps explain it, which is why I would say the carrying capacity is not necessarily like a hard maximum. You can go beyond the carrying capacity, but if you do, then your rate of change is going to be negative, and so the creatures are going to die out, and they're going to go back towards the carrying capacity. Okay, let's see what else we have on here. Somebody's got a great example of negative feedback, where it says, let the number of people without the flu be represented by S, and the number of people with the flu be represented by N. Oh, wow. This person's done a really good job here saying that the presence of flu can be described, the presence of the flu, the rate of change is a product of the sick individuals multiplied by the people who are susceptible. So actually that, thank you for entering that example of the flu to whoever put that in there, because it makes me realize that I misspoke in my 2D example. When I was trying to apply that two-dimensional example to what was called SIR modeling in section 1.4, I said that the number of infected individuals may affect, the number of susceptibles may infect the number of infected, or vice versa, but more properly, the rate at which that occurs should be proportional to the product of both of those states. Yeah, so really the rate of infection is proportional to the rate of interaction. And how do we know how these things are going to interact? The simplest way to describe that is by multiplying their two states together. You'll also see that in the shark tuna model. I'm going to make a video for the shark tuna model that you'll see in week 3. And the feeding rate, or the amount of tunas that get eaten, and likewise the amount of food that the sharks get, is not just proportional to just T or just S. It's proportional to the product S times T. Thanks for giving that example, because that clears that up. These are all great questions, but I think I'm going to move on because we're almost at an hour mark here. And so I just want to introduce one last mode. Thanks for sticking with me, everybody, because this is, that was a really long one. I didn't realize it would take that long. I'm going to switch it to the next question, which is just, what else would you like to hear me talk about? And maybe we'll, just do this one for a little bit, but one of the main things I wanted to do with this was introduce a new mode. This mode is called the Brainstorm Mode, and it's different than the open-ended mode because you can submit responses similar to open-ended, but as the responses come in, everybody gets the opportunity to vote on all the responses. Okay, so I'll wait until somebody puts something in. Like somebody just put in, what is the difference between statement of the concept and explanation of the concept? That's a great question for the concept discussion boards. And for everybody who's still participating, not only do you see a place that you can type in a question or suggestion, but you'll also see underneath that all the things that have come in so far, you can vote on them. So if there's other people out there who like that question and who want to see me respond to that question, you can upvote it. And I'm looking at the response screen right now, and I see that somebody just upvoted it. And so now it has a net vote of 1, and now it has a net vote of 2. And so this is called the Brainstorm Mode because it allows us to all do feedback to each other, right? Like whoever threw in the question, other people can say, yeah, I like that question, or sometimes, depending on what it is, you might want to downvote that. Like, I don't know if somebody wants to put in a bad example so that we can see the downvoting part too, but I'll let that sit for a little while so people can add in more stuff, and I'll respond to the first question. The difference between the statement and the explanation of the concept for your concept discussion post is that the statement of the concept is just simply saying it. Like, what are you talking about? So the statement is just really short. My first concept is carrying capacity. Done. Or my concept is state space. The statement is just defining it. And then the explanation is going into it in your own words, like we saw with the open-ended poll above. And you see somebody said, if you could burp any song, what would it be? And like maybe some people don't want to hear the answer to that question. So you can see that the burping question got downvoted, and I'm not a very good burp singer, so I'm not even gonna touch that one. But thank you for putting that in as an example of something that could possibly get downvoted. So you're gonna see that it has that one has 1 upvote and it has maybe 7 downvotes, so it has a net vote score of -6. So if we tried this brainstorm again, like for Thursday's session, I'll try to do this again on Thursday. I might say in the brainstorm mode, what questions from section 1.4 do you want to see me do? And then I'm going to let that brainstorm simmer for a couple of minutes. And then I imagine whichever question rose to the top of the brainstorm, that's the one that I might start out with. So keep that in mind. Remember, I mentioned this in my Zoom sessions that although I've assigned 4 sections this week, the bulk of your work occurs in section 1.4. I would say that's at least half the work for the week is section 1.4. So don't be fooled time management wise if you've done the first 2 sections really quick and you're like, oh, so this is going to be easy. The first 2 sections is only maybe 15 or 20%. And then section 1.3 gets bigger, and then section 1.4 is really the biggest. And if you're able to get all the way there and look at the questions, especially the further exercises in 1.4 before the Thursday session, then this will be a better opportunity to get any misunderstandings addressed live. Another question which has 5 upvotes and now is the current winner of the brainstorm is this going to happen every Tuesday, same time? Good question. So without further ado, and because we are approaching the 60-minute mark, I'm going to show you our last mode. This is the clickable image mode. And it says, how do you feel about our live YouTube live today? So I was really going to base the answer of, am I going to do this again, off the responses here. Looks like a lot of people are enjoying this. That's really great. I was hoping for that. And so if this is really supporting your learning, then I'd like to continue doing this every Tuesday and Thursday. For my own time management, that might mean that I might possibly reduce the Zoom sessions down a little bit to make room for this. I've been watching attendance in the Zoom sessions and noticing that that like sometimes there'll be like 10 or 12 people and other times there's like 1 or 2 people. And in the smaller sections, well, the community building that I thought we were using that for isn't happening in, the amount of bulk that I was hoping it would. So I might change the Zoom sessions down to like 2, maybe 2 30 or 40-minute sessions instead of 4 20s so that we can have larger subsets of the class interact. And then I'd also like to follow that up each week with a YouTube Live, because this will be a great resource. I also want to be mindful of those who are unable to join us, whether they have time constraint issues or Wi-Fi issues. There are several students out there who can't be in part of the live session. So to be able to have this all recorded and saved to the Canvas page and up the video stream up on YouTube will really help those people out. I just got the announcement yesterday that the school district is closed for the rest of the year now. They're supposed to reopen at the end of April, and now they're closed for the rest of the year. So I don't know who else has kids out there, but I have 2 kids, and that's been a huge impact in my personal life. And I just hope everybody's staying safe out there. And I'm really mindful of the holistic aspect of life, that besides being students, we might be parents, we might be caretakers of our own parents or other family members. We might have many other duties in our lives. And I want to respect that and try to make this work for everybody. So thank you for your comments. Somebody says, this feels way more like we're in a class. And I love it, and I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, because the board's here and everything, and we've got the whole class interacting together. I really appreciate you all, and I look forward to seeing you again on Thursday. So I'll have my next one of the YouTube Lives will be after the Zoom sessions from 3 to 4 p.m. I'll do this again on Thursday, and the main objective will be to take your questions on homework 2. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again later. Bye.